issue of our writers beyond distance. And just to say a few things before we formally begin, that from my side and from the side of my department, a heartiest welcome. So it is basically the responsibility of our principal sir to welcome the guest. The guest here is Sucharita ma'am, Sucharita Datta. And one surprising thing जो मैं कह चाहता था that I wanted to convey to the audience, and that is why I didn't convey it to my host, the student hosts. I wanted to declare a surprise basically, so that some of you must not be aware that Sucharita ji is from Jamshedpur itself. Sucharita ji is born and brought up in Jamshedpur, and even she led quite a good part of her life here. And this is what she has shared it today in the Facebook also. So this is what I basically wanted to share with the audience. Otherwise, the format of this program is that our student host will take up this session from me. So I request Priyanka Mahto and Uruj Razi to begin the program formally. Priyanka Mahto or Uruj Razi.
Very good evening to one and all present here. I, Uruj Razi from BA Semester 4, would extend my heartiest welcome to one and all present here, our honorable guest, Sucharita Dutta-Asane ma'am, our principal, Dr. Muhammad Riyaz sir, our HOD, SMEI Ibrahim sir, our respected professors, and my dear friends, in another session of Writers Beyond Distance. Writers Beyond Distance is an e-initiative program by the Department of English to connect creativity across miles to every soul's home. With this note, I welcome you all to today's session titled Voices and Silences, which would be delivered by our guest, Sucharita Dutta-Asane. But before moving forward, I would invite our principal, Dr. Muhammad Riyaz sir, to welcome our honorable guest. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ruth. A warm good evening to everyone present here today. I am proud and honored today to welcome Sucharita Dutta-Asane among us, a Pune-based writer, editor, and a mentor who needs no introduction to the world of letters. On behalf of the management of Karim City College, Jamshedpur, I express my deep gratitude to her for taking time out of her busy schedule to talk to our students and share her love of reading and writing with them. Writer Beyond Distance is an e-initiative of the Department of English, Karim City College, which intends to open the doors of creativity for our students by introducing them to fertile minds across the globe. In the earlier events of this series, the department has welcomed several writers of the national and international repute. Today's interaction with Sucharita Dutta-Asane is the another one in the series, and we are all eagerly looking forward to a wonderful lecture. I congratulate the head Department of English, Dr. S.M. Ibrahim, for his efforts in bringing Sucharita Dutta-Asane to us and wish the department a wonderful event today. I extend my best wishes to the department, its students, and its faculty members for a dynamic learning session. I extend my best wishes to the department, its students, and its faculty members for a dynamic learning session ahead. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sir, Sucharita Dutta-Asane ma'am is an award-winning writer and an independent editor based in Pune. Her short stories collection, Passport and Other Stories, was Amazon Best of Summer from India. In 2013, she has received an inaugural Dastan Award by Pakistan-based paper Cut magazine. for her short stories Dearly. In 2008, she received the Oxford Bookstore Debuting Writers Award for younger stories. Her fiction and non-fiction works have appeared in various literary journals and anthologies. From September 2017 to March 2019, she has edited an online literary magazine, Kitab, which was published from Singapore. She edits fiction for the Bangalore Reviews, teaches graduate, undergraduate courses for writing and editing at Symbiosis College of Arts and Commerce and Plate University, Pune. It is an honor to have you, ma'am. Looking forward towards a wonderful session. Thank you so much. The platform is all yours, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that lovely, warm welcome. Thank you to all of you in the English department, to Sri Ashok Dash, who make this program possible and successful. I'm sure a lot of work, a lot of effort goes into it, contacting writers, organizing this with so many people. So I'm immensely grateful to all of you for this platform. For me, this session, this meeting with all of you also has, as Dr. Ibrahim has already said, special resonance because Jamshedpur is my hometown, my birthplace, an identity that has now ruptured. With my father's passing, I have lost my immediate physical connections with the city. I find myself at that threshold space of being in the place and not being there, of remembering the ties that bind me to it and loosening them all at once. And I find myself thus in a space that is neither here nor there, yet it holds the past and the present within its cusp. So thank you to all of you once again for this invisible thread that renews my bond with the place of my birth and adolescence. Given this unique yet universal space in which I identify myself, the threshold, with the past behind me, the future half in the shade of uncertainty and half in the light of expectation, anticipation, I thought of calling this conversation Voices and Silences. The threshold is such a space, milling with the echoes of what has transpired and containing the trembling hush of what is to come, of the promise of possibilities, a space that I address again and again in my own writing. Just a request before I actually begin, please do tell me if I overshoot the time limit. Yeah. So I'll be reading extracts from my writing and talk of the idea of silence. So silence is a powerful tool in fiction for nonverbal communication. It is the liminal space where movement halts before resuming, where nonverbal communication intensifies, the narrative breathes, where emotion, mood is conveyed, and where flux and timelessness cohere. It is the space where meaning expands and contracts through the pairing or removal of words rather than in their use. I'll read a very short excerpt from an article carried in the Marginalian, a wonderful e-zine. The article is titled The Origin and Cultural Evolution of Silence and quotes from George Prochnik's book In Pursuit of Silence, Listening for Meaning in a World of Noise. I quote, "The roots of our English term silence sink down through the language in multiple directions. Among the word's antecedents is the Gothic verb anasilan, a word that denotes the wind dying down, and the Latin desinere, a word meaning stop. Both of these etymologies suggest the way that silence is bound up with the idea of interrupted action. The pursuit of silence, likewise, is dissimilar from most other pursuits in that it generally begins with the surrender of the chase, the abandonment of efforts to impose our will and vision on the world. Not only is it about standing still, with rare exceptions, the pursuit of silence seems initially to involve a step backward from the tussle of life. The French sculptor Rodin famously claimed that his sculpting process was all about removing the stone that wasn't part of the sculpture. And Louis Armstrong, the famous jazz musician, maintained that the important notes were the ones he did not play. So paintings, movies, music, all art forms convey silence in their own unique ways. I need to share the screen. May I do so now?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Is the image available to you on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a painting by Vincent Homer done in 1873. It's titled Dad's Coming. If you look closely at the image, there is the promise of movement all around. There are boats, there's the sea, there are children in it, and yet this painting conveys silence despite this promise of movement. This is the silence of waiting, of expectation, of anxiety, all held within this single image as installed time, the cusp that I have referred to earlier. There's another image that I would like to share. One minute, please. Okay, this is called The Beaches by Asher Brown Durand, painted in 1845. Here too, the painter conveys silence through aerial perspective, not through movement as such, but through an aerial perspective, through light and distance. There is the near absence of movement in it, as though nature's stillness holds the promise of great movement within it. So it's by foregrounding and perspective and all of these things and the kind of light used, all of these things come together in this painting to convey this mood of silence, although we can sense some kind of movement. There is a human being, there are animals. So, sorry. So nature, not only in painting, even in fiction, nature proves to be a great ally. I'll read an extract from my novel, which is still work in progress. Here, nature conveys silence, which is integral to the character's mood and her emotional stature and requirement in this moment. The chapter is titled White Light and focuses on the principal character, Urmila. She is struggling with fading memory due to some trauma, and she's a widow into her prime. And here, as she struggles to grapple with her memory, we find her reading her diary, which she often does in the stories. And she reads the diary in order to get an idea of what her past was like, because much of it she seems to have forgotten. And often she tries to recall what the past was like when her husband was alive. So in this particular excerpt that I will read, she reads about the time of her son's Annaprashan. That's the first time a baby is fed rice. Urmila picks up another diary. It has a red cover. She flips through the pages quickly, her eyes scanning for dates, days. When did this happen? When did that not happen? So many accumulated experiences, so much remains unoccurred. Yet, why does she have this feeling of floating in shunya, like primeval vacuum? Perhaps it is the undatedness of her diary that gives her life its sense of void, neverness, or perhaps its foreverness. She shuts her eyes, waits to a count of 50, then opens the diary again at random. And now she's reading from the diary. That evening, we sat behind the curtains, sprites at two ends of the wide windowsill. It stays with me, the memory of that passing moment, and when I think of it, it seems to me like a butterfly, young and restless, yet within my grasp, its wings beating a rhythm against my cupped palms. The house was full of guests for Siddharth's Annaprashan. During the ceremony, he took a morsel of rice, gaping and blinking at the sudden crowd of relatives and friends around him, a little prince under the scanner. The rest of us gorged through the day and then a few more. The house was swollen, distended with too much food, talk, too many voices. And I, drifting, purposeless amidst the hubbub. In the evening, adults and children gathered around the carom board and the card table. The drinks and food on offer would have put Kuber to shame, the chatter and laughter incessant. Suddenly, whoosh, no lights. Did we move? No. For one sweet frozen moment, we all stayed where we were. Perhaps each of us had found the tiny space we crave in the midst of friendly noise, especially in the midst of friendly noise. A dark island, till the flare from a cigarette lighter broke open the darkness and Aniruddha and I spotted each other. Before candles and lamps could be lighted, we tiptoed up the stairs, hands held, into our bedroom. Quietly, we shut the door behind us and stood in the sudden silence, before sounds and noises floated up once again from the rooms below. We sat behind the curtains. What peace! Someone shouted somewhere, "Hey, get the candle!" We sat for a while, two ghosts lit up by the moon. We sat in the silence, sometimes whispering, sometimes quiet, while the moon climbed the sky. We could hear our names being called, distant murmurs. Siddharth started crying. Then he started bawling. Somebody called out for me, then somebody called out again for me. Aniruddha looked at me. I turned away. Quietly, he got up and walked out to his son. I sat moon-washed, my breasts heavy with milk. Crying is good for the lungs, I thought. Let him cry a little more. Let me sit here a little longer, here in the silence, in this rectangle of quiet white light. As I turned to the window, all noise, all sound receded. I unlatched the window and stood in the cold, inhaling, holding, exhaling, holding, inhaling, holding. I saw moonlight dip into the trees and rise over the hills. I saw myself, a speck of white light, receding, 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 then scooped up and placed back again in this shaft of whiteness between the moon and the curtain. A trembling thought, nothing more. That's the end of the extract. So there are voices here in this house, voices of other people who bring their own force to the character's life, to her emotions, her personal needs. And then there is a voice of her unuttered conversation with her husband as they sit in this quiet space. This quietness is communion. Here, silence is a cocoon within which she can reclaim the self, let it flow out and come back to her, replenishing what motherhood threatens to exhaust in her. This quietness is also the communion between a story and its reader. It's as if the story is telling the reader, hold this moment, let it flow out and then come back to that moment when the story will move again. Like silence in cinema, when all noise ceases till it begins again. Allow me to read this recent non-fiction piece I wrote called Neem Leaves and Silence. This is about an Indian summer in Jamshedpur when I was very young, and I write about this in order to see how silence as an element has seeped into my own writing. There is something about the Indian summer that seeps into our writing and music. A stream of consciousness. Would you like me to share the screen? Otherwise, just listening gets too boring. Should I share the screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, yeah, 1 second. Okay, can you all see it on the screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So there is something about the Indian summer that seeps into our writing and music, a stream of consciousness that seems to both arise from and lead to it. This season of mango blossoms, 4 o'clock showers, lemon tea, and steam rising off roads and walls. In my childhood, it was also a time for chicken pox, the sensory presence of illness melting into that of the season, neem leaves and mango blossoms. For all of you in Jamshedpur, this is very relatable, this kind of a summer. It reminds me of smells, fragrances, sounds, soundlessness, of moments when the world seemed to be in silent transit, noiseless, like the earth's around the sun or on its axis. One such summer, I found myself, aged 10, quarantined with chickenpox and boredom. Chickenpox used to be a 3-week-long affair till the scabs fell off and the skin cleared. 21 days with nothing to do was unimaginable. I was a talkative kid, my mother was busy with home and college, and others did not come into the room except to give me my plate of unpalatable, pox-appropriate food. In a house with a large extended family, mother-child time was anyway a luxury, so the only way to beat the blues, the itchiness, and the aloneness was to read. That's how Arthur Mee's Children's Encyclopedia slipped into my life. 10 thick volumes with their rich text and pictures on every subject conceivable. Confined to a bed in a room, I began to travel the world. For my 10-year-old mind, it was as if a million flowers had blossomed all at once, their fragrance mingling with the smell of those old pages, already turning brown, smooth to the touch, the cover hard and grainy. Its rich brown spine held against my feverish cheeks, a blessing to inhale and remember for the rest of my life. Along with the book, Ma would place a bundle of neem twigs, the leaves fresh and bright, and the erratically broken off twigs almost fragile. The books were to keep me occupied and the neem to brush away the itch and the scabs as they began to come off. But then there was another ritual to follow, to cleanse the books I had touched and hugged and laid my head on at times. Once I finished reading or got bored with a volume, Ma would wipe it clean of germs with a piece of cloth dipped in boiling neem water and squeezed dry. She would do this for each volume, as many times as I took them from her. In 21 days, I had read through as much as possible, first out of boredom, then with rising curiosity and interest, the 10 tomes. Reading them and then watching Ma quietly wipe them clean became a ritual, a silent communion among the books, Ma and me. In retrospect, the cleansing became a kind of parallel time that we spent. Ma was always reticent, quiet, usually a single word, sentence, or silence in response to my deluge of words. It was a lifelong pattern. Nonetheless, she found a way to communicate and to solve, and as she did so, the silence in the room mingled with the smell of neem leaves in water and the smell of the encyclopedia's old pages. When my short fiction collection Cast Out and Other Stories was published in 2018, I was asked about my writing style. I had written those stories in an unself-conscious mode, writing as they spoke to me, rarely stopping to ponder over style. I realized later how much I had drawn from those moments when Ma and I and the books sat together in the bedroom, the windows open to the summer sounds, to the quietude of the afternoons, to the smell of the trees and the warm grass, the hot road outside, the smell of the box, the smell of Ma's sari and her body as she bent over me, helping to get to that scratchy point on the back where my fingers could not reach. The feel of the neem leaves brushing across my skin, the noise of vehicles on the road, sometimes muted, sometimes loud. Much of what one writes comes from sensory memory. I tell my writing and editing classes, and that silence is one such detail that is often overlooked. When I ask my students to shut their eyes and think of a sensory memory, they often recount moments of quietness, but rarely of silence. As a child, I didn't know the difference between silence and quietness. As I grew up, I realized that quietness could be a natural attribute, whereas silence is an internal state of being that lingers long after the quietness has passed. Silence is of many kinds, and there is no one word that can describe them all, their tones and resonances. Writing needs silence, within and without. The white, impersonal noise of a cafe is silence created in the mind. The cacophony of home sets up eddies of silence that has to be willed into being. The silence at the end of a question has layers, simultaneous as well as wayward, to be woven into the writing. When I bought Shashi Deshpande's That Long Silence for Ma, she said I had understood her as only a daughter could. Or did she use the word should? One sentence and silence afterwards. I remember trying to wade through that silence, but I wasn't worldly wise enough at the time to find my way to the other side. It was as if every word, every sentence she spoke was a negotiation with not wanting to speak. I began to understand the spaces in this tussle much later, through the characters that inhabit my stories. I see myself reflected in Ma's silences, like Monet's four trees, meeting at the edges of contact, then fading away, understanding who I am by understanding the nature of the quietude. Silence and its forms have seeped into my writing. The meditative nature of writing is nothing but listening to that silence, to the words as they soundlessly take shape on the page, their articulation, tonality, meaning, their coming together and going away, their bearing images and distilling thoughts, their ellipses and spaces. Listen to the distillation, the silence urges. When I give in, I write. When I don't, I pretend to write. Silence is courage. Silence is cowardice. Silence is protest, surrender, rebuke, approval, presence, absence, shield, wall, restfulness, negation. Silence hides a lie. Silence is truth unspoken. Over time, I learned to decode this as I observed Ma. How each of these speaks to me as a writer and often guides me as an editor is something I have understood only in retrospect. Much of it has slipped into and between the lines of my writing as unobtrusively as the smell of neem leaves and the encyclopedia's sepia pages did into my life all those years ago. How do I stop sharing? Okay. In 2007, I think many of you will be familiar with this incident. In 2007, violence broke out in Nandigram, West Bengal. I was absolutely shaken by the extent of what was happening, by the sense of entitlement that one section of the citizenry seemed to have over the lives of others. And in that condition of feeling absolutely perturbed and overwhelmed, I wrote a story titled Fire. I continued to write the story over the next 7 years till it finally took the shape I wanted it to take. So in this story, a village fights off outsiders, very much like Nandigram, like the Nandigram episode. And they are fighting off outsiders who want their land for industry as well as for urban development of other kinds. So in the tussle that ensues, the village is cut off from the rest of civilization. It is almost under siege. And I begin the story from this point. The story is told in two voices. 3/4 of it is in the journalist's first person voice. He tells us what he sees happening in the village, but his information, his perspective is very, very limited and uncertain because nobody is sharing information with him. So there is a kind of self-imposed silence in the village, And the last part of the story is told in the third person omniscient narrator's voice, because at that point, the journalist is kidnapped and he cannot any longer tell us what he sees of the unfolding incidents. So in Fire, I use silence as the atmospherics of the story. In this story, silence is political, it is spatial, it is also circumstantial. So on one hand, we have this immense cacophony of an event that devastates. And then we have the silence imposed due to this incident. We also have the silence within which the reporter works. This is the silence that the village has imposed. They refuse to talk to any outsider. So the reporter has to work within this silence, and this is the silence of self-preservation. The silence that arises out of distrust of outsiders. And then we have the silence of the countryside at night. So in this story, silence works as absence of speech as well as a barrier. Silence is resistance, silence is solidarity, silence is a kind of cover. So after all of this silence that we see, and within this silence, the village is gearing up to fight. What happens is towards the end, the female protagonist called Savitri, she's kidnapped and she is raped for days together. And at the end of this time, after days of being raped, Savitri stands, she's then, pushed out of this building where she was being raped by these people who want possession of the village. And they tell her that go and keep all the doors open. Now, this was something that had been said during the Nandigram episode, and this stuck to my mind, this phrase, this immense entitlement of men trying to impose fear by subjugating women, rape as a political tool. So here I use that, what the media had reported. And so as these men throw Savitri out after raping her and telling her to keep doors open, Savitri stands in the immense silence of the fields in moonlight. She's raped and now she stands there and collects herself and her thoughts. And there is complete silence everywhere. And standing in this silence, ravaged in body and mind, Savitri ululates. And this sound, it is more than breaking of silence. It is louder. It is much more pervasive. It is much more all-encompassing because it breaks the silencing of the village, the silencing of the women, the silencing of their right to protest and to keep their village intact. So we have these silences throughout the story, and then we have Savitri's protest through her ululation. And this, in a way, is her clarion call to arms, to everybody else. I'm not going to read from the story because I don't think I'll be able to manage the time. But in this story, silence and noise work in very different ways than in what I just read out from my novel excerpt. So the spaces where silence rather than words work are also the spaces where I, as the writer, feel most immersed and engaged in the story. This is where the story is at its most demanding. How long do I let this silence palpate? So for me, when I'm writing a story, silence is what I leave out rather than what I include. Silence is the atmospheric silence in the story. Silence is the characters not speaking or not responding in a particular moment. So it is always a challenge to know how long do I let this be and when should the narrative move again. In my collection of short stories, Cast Out, and other stories, the titular story Cast Out, it, sorry, is the story of Tara, the village priest's wife, and she is rebellious. She visits the village temple even on those days when she's menstruating, and this is completely unacceptable to the village. While almost everyone thinks she's wrong to do so, there are some, in fact, there are many who feel that it is because of her behavior that the signalman's daughter-in-law cannot give birth to sons, the wrath of God, so to say. I wrote the story again in the first and third person voices, first person for Tara when she tells her story, and third person for the rest of it. So Cast Out explores a situation many of us can identify with. I'll read out very short excerpts from it, where I break the section in order to push this idea of silence, of not having answers for the questions that the story raises. So this is a very short excerpt when Tara is going up the hill towards the temple and she meets another young woman called Janki. On my way up the temple steps, I meet Janki. Will you wait? I'll be back soon. She smiles in assent. I return earlier than I want to. She's pregnant, and I don't want her to wait in the hot sun. Handing over a sprinkling of the sugar I had offered to Bholenath, I look into her doe eyes. What did you pray for today? She smiles. Her eyes dance. My in-laws want me to pray for a son. The first child in the family after 15 years should be a boy, you know, she says. So did you pray for a son? I ask. She moves away towards the shade of the banyan, takes out a spool of sacred red thread, and walks around the tree. After tying the thread around the trunk 7 times, she returns to where I wait for her. You know, when I stand before Bholenath, I am a free woman. How? Who knows what my silently moving lips pray for? Who knows whether I pray at all? Can anyone prove I didn't ask for a son? Later, Tara's husband, who is the priest, he's scolded by the village headman for Tara's behavior. So when he returns home, Tara braces herself for the onslaught. Have you no shame, woman? He asks his wife. Did not your mother instruct you well when you were growing up? My mother was a priest, Tara says. She never missed a day of puja as long as she lived. She died young, he says. Was she cursed to death? Is that what you want to say? And I make a section break there. There is no answer. In either case, the response to the questions is silence and the narrative moves on. It works differently. Silence works differently in the last part of the story as it winds down to its a very unexpected end. So the villagers have gathered at the priest's door. They're thirsty for Tara's blood because the signalman's daughter-in-law has again given birth to a daughter. And this is just not acceptable. So they've all come to get Tara. She is when they come to get her, she's serving food to her husband who has come back from some journey, and this is how it unravels. As she quietly serves him his food and listens to him describe his trip to the city, she keeps secret her own travails of the day. A knock sounds on the outer door. Her hand trembles momentarily, and the lentils spill over from the ladle she holds. The knocking resumes rapidly on the door and windows. A metallic object grates along the window bars. She recognizes the sound and pushes away the utensils. The priest opens the door to find the village at his doorstep. Where is Tara, Pujariji? The priest looks from his face to his sons, to the others collected in the motley crowd of women, men, young girls, and boys. They peep into the house. He follows their gaze. Behind him, the kitchen door stands open. Beyond it, darkness. He feels the rush of bodies as they pour into the house and out through the open door. He trembles alone in the room suddenly emptied out, thinks of Tara alone out there, and finds his sandals at last. So Tara has understood what's going to happen. She has run out of the house and she's simply running. She doesn't know where she has to go. On the way, she is suddenly grabbed by a woman who looks like, in a very mad state into her eyes. And Tara realizes that it will be either her life or nothing today. So she is running, pell-mell, and she comes to the temple. As she thinks of other ways to escape, a hand reaches out and pulls her back. She stares into hate-filled eyes. Other hands will grab her too. She struggles free and runs into the temple as shouts rent the air. She hears her husband supplicating, "We will leave this village. Go away. Don't harm her, I beseech you. We don't believe you. She's done enough harm already. Get out of the way. Where will you go? We will banish you anyway." And he again pleads, "We will leave. Let her be." Tara reaches the sanctum sanctorum and scrambles into it. The voices cease. She leans against the idol, panting, her heart pounding, head throbbing. Her sari brushes against it. Her temple rests against its cold stone, and she stares at the deity, close to her, cheek to cheek. She wants to live in this moment of exaltation, but there is no rare door here. She turns around to face her assailants. A collective gasp, then silence. She stares at her pursuers. The priest stands aside, disbelieving. What has she done? Inside the Garbhagriha, the sanctum sanctorum, in her condition, revulsion for the unanticipated, the unaccepted seals their mouths, chokes their voices. They cannot believe their eyes. Does the night play tricks on them? Is she really inside the venerated space, Shiva's private chamber, staining his purity? How will we worship here again? The grain trader sounds belligerent. How could she do this? Tara smiles as she looks at the deity. What will you do, Bholenath? The priest finds his voice. We will leave. Why create more trouble now? What about the idol? They ask. Take it home, the priest says. Whose home? He's everybody's God. Women and men are aghast. How will we worship an impure idol, Pujariji? How can you suggest this? Don't you see what she has done? In our time, we did not even enter the kitchen, and she? No, we cannot allow this. We cannot worship this idol any longer. the voices rise in unison. Inside, Tara turns towards the idol and gently wipes caked sandal paste, turmeric, and vermilion from its forehead with her sari end. She picks out the dry flowers at its feet and puts them away in a heap on the floor. She picks up the idol, staggers under its unexpected weight, and walks out with Bholenath nestled in her arms, her dark hair curling over his locks. Nobody moves. When she reaches the temple entrance with the deity, the priest takes one last look at the petrified assembly and falls in step by her side. In the moon's surreal light, the empty temple stands silent, its deity outcast. Down below, a train screeches to its ritual halt. The passengers bow their heads and send up prayers to a god they cannot see. So here the silence is in the atmospherics, the silence is in the people's response, the silence is in what happens at the end, and it also signifies ritualistic blind devotion. In another story I wrote called The Interlude, it was written during the pandemic. I work with silence throughout the story. And in this story, the silence has to be amplified and evoked because it denotes a period in historical time that is marked by silence. And this silence is composed of the stunnedness of people at what a virus has done. This is the silence imposed by rule of law, one that cannot be broken. This is the silence of fear, fear of the virus, fear of law, fear of one another, fear for one another. It's also the silence of anxiety in a collective of time, almost throbbing. And so the story works with this soundlessness. There are voices, but all of the voices in the story are only in this single character in the story and his thoughts. The rest of the story is enveloped in silence. Also because it needs to mute all voice, because during the pandemic, what we saw was that human presence is an absence. And in the story, I tried to make this absence palpable, and therefore silence has to be an integral part of this story. Do I have time? Can I read from it?
Yes, ma'am, we have a few minutes.
Okay, so I'll try to hurry up now. Or maybe I won't read from it now if there's time later. So as I said, I deal with silence in the story. But many of the characters I write are also they who look into the mirror. It's this introspection, reflection. And as we know, reflection and introspection carry inherent silence. So when the character acts or responds, it is to what this silence engenders, the silence of introspection as one is looking into the mirror. Much of what I write also deals with memory. And memory, again, as we know, is full of chaos and silence. There are different zones. Often they intermesh. As the characters ride the waves of this chaos and silence, and as the story follows them, it is in the silent zones that the story begins to make itself heard, when it becomes contemplative, reflective. And so sometimes, instead of atmospherics or a person's quietness, I introduce section breaks. And these section breaks turn into denote time lapse, a deepening of unuttered communication, a deepening of communion. The section breaks mark transition, suspense, uncertainty as the story changes pace or shifts gears. These section breaks also enable questions to be left suspended, unanswered by the characters. Often, this kind of break is scattered elsewhere in the story where the story demands it, where the story is unable to provide or generate the answers. But when this appears at the end of a story, where a story is open-ended, then it becomes also like a long ellipsis, for no story ends where the writer ends it. It continues in the reader's mind, in the reader's understanding, in the reader's interpretation, and the possibilities that the reader sees in the end, and what could happen had the story continued. I wrote a story called Another Life, in which a wife finds out that the husband she thought had died is in fact alive, but he's memory impaired. She brings him back home from the hospital, where they call her, but she realizes that instead of her, her husband remembers another woman he had loved before her. Now the conundrum is this: will the wife slide into the earlier woman's role? Or will she reclaim the life they had built together? How is she going to prod his memory of her? Will he regain memory? The story cannot answer this question, but it leaves the possibility of what may happen, or what are the possibilities for this story through the silence at the end of the story. So this is the last short excerpt I will read. This woman, this wife called Anu, from the time she gets to know of her husband first having died, and then she gets to know he's alive, and she gets him home from the hospital, she constantly writes letters to him, addressed to him. And she actually navigates and negotiates all her thoughts and emotions through these letters. So this excerpt starts with a letter, and then the story ends. Dearest Samir, from the depths of your subconscious, you've drawn upon lost love. Shalmi's risen from the dead to stake claim. Shalmi is the woman he had loved earlier. Shalmi's risen from the dead to stake claim. Have I got you back from death, or lost you to the dead? When you told me about Shalmi just after our wedding, on my demand to know your past, after I had told you about the man I had loved but didn't marry, you told me that Shalmi was a sweet chapter in your life that you neither regretted nor pined for. If I were to lose you, Anu, you said, I would pine for you. You are my present. Isn't that what you said, Samir? Talking of the past and present, could we have thought of such a future that day? How do we relate to each other now? How will I respond to another name, another identity? When your memory returns, or has it just returned? Was it its absence that we lived all these years? She doesn't know how to end the letter. Isn't it enough to have him with her alive, to love and be loved, despite the trespassing past? She sits through the night, reliving her life with him, thinking of the one to come, hoping for miracles and memories. In the morning's still innocent half-light, as she massages his head and shoulders, she bends over him. He sits with blank eyes. Shalmi? His voice is deep from another life. Samir, she says. Don't go away, Shalmi. She needs the tense muscles at his shoulders. If she could need his memory, whom would she find? She calls in sick at the office. I'll come in tomorrow, she assures her boss. In the afternoon, she goes out and buys strings of jasmine from the flower seller outside the gate. In the evening, after their ritual tea, she takes Samir by the hand and leads him to the bedroom, to the mirror in it. Take this, she tells him, and places a string of jasmines in his hand. The fragrance is overpowering. She turns around, her back to him. Braid the flowers in my hair, she says, and waits for him to remember how to do it. I thought, when I was writing the story, I thought of, taking the story ahead from this point. And then I realized, I do not know if he regains his memory. I do not know if he remembers who she is, and I do not know what the wife is going to do. So I ended the story at this moment when the story opens itself up to the immense possibilities of movement, and each reader is free to interpret what will happen next. So the story does not impose that interpretation or that understanding. So I believe that silence is omission, the pairing, the pruning. It is the subscript, the part of the story that really throbs. So let me end with what Hemingway said, quote, "You could omit anything if you knew that the omitted part would strengthen the short story and make people feel something more than they understood." Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for such a wonderful session. I'm sure that everyone felt moved and connected to your words, and we all were emotionally connected throughout the session. Thank you for such a wonderful experience. We have learned a lot, and you have inspired us with your words today. We look forward to hearing more from you in future. Thank you so much, ma'am, for such a wonderful experience.
Thank you, Ruj. Thank you so much.
So, can the audience unmute themselves and ask their question?
Yes, sure.
The audience can post their question in the chat box, or they can unmute themselves.
Okay, I can see Bashudra and Kausar ma'am together. That's good to see. Sucharita ji, I think that you are already aware about Bashudra.
Yeah,
She
we
is in our
connected.
department,
Yes.
so we can see her there on the screen with one of another colleague in our history department.
Hello. Hi.
It was really a very nice, what do you would like to say, talk, man. We can visualize somebody who was basically playing a lot of role when you were speaking. You were not speaking simply as a writer. You were basically and really speaking as a mentor of literature, and certainly as somebody who has a lot of philosophical views regarding silence. So beginning with those two pictures, you took us to those poems that we have read in our school and college days about silences. Whether it was Gray's elegy, which is there about the graveyard silence, or Wordsworth's poem, which is about the lake. The Daffodils poem, which is about a garden or a lake and its silence, and then bringing us to the silence of Nandigram and to the silence. Ma'am, thank you. I now request the audience, if they have any question, they can unmute themselves.
Ma'am, we have a question in the chat box. It is by Shaista Rahman. Uh, Thank you, madam, for this wonderful session. Madam, you have used silence as a technique in your creative writing. My question is that, as a reader, can I raise voice against ruling government in a scholarly write-up, or do I need to maintain silence here?
That I would leave that up to you. I cannot take that decision on your behalf. Exactly as I do not take decisions on behalf of the characters in my stories. So it's up to you.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. We have another question by Arzu Nas. Ma'am, has silence muted your inner self, or did it bring positivity in your life? What does your silent thought express to you? And do you try to eliminate it in your words, or you just keep it in your memory?
Thank you, Arzu. That's a very interesting question. Silence is not just to be written about or written in, but also to be practiced. Yes, I do think silence has brought in a lot of positivity in the sense of silencing of external noise is very important when you're writing. And I think that I have been able to do, and that helps me immensely. So even if I'm sitting in a public space and there's a lot of noise, I can just about, what should I say, dig into that well of silence that I have built inside me, and that helps me to write and to concentrate. And sometimes I think I do it better when I'm in the middle of noise but silent inside. So yes, that has been a very, very positive thing in my life.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Does that answer your question, Arzu?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Anyone else who would like to ask any question or say a few things? We have Dr. Sandhya Sinha here. She herself is a writer of Hindi as well as Bhojpuri. She is an editor of a very famous Bhojpuri magazine also. So I request मैम संध्या मैम अगर आप कुछ कहना चाहें या कुछ जोड़ना चाहें अपनी ओर से, या अगर आप कुछ मैम के सामने पूछना चाहें, संध्या मैम प्लीज. ओके, वो चैट बॉक्स में थैंक यू सर कह रही हैं. संध्या मैम कुछ कहेंगी नहीं?
थैंक यू सर. तो इट वाज सो इंटरेस्टिंग, बहुत ही अच्छा लगा सर. मैम की जितने एक्सपीरियंसेस थे रियली रियली सचमुच में बहुत ही रोमांचकारी रहे. और आपने जो साइलेंस को जिस तरह से आपने एक्सप्रेस किया मैम, जिस तरह से आपने उसको अपने अंदर के साइलेंस को जिस तरह से वर्ड्स दिया, ये सचमुच में बहुत अच्छा है. और जो हमारे भावी जो राइटर्स हैं, लिखने वाले हैं, जो अपने जीवन में कुछ करना चाहते हैं, उस साइलेंस को अंदर के अपने भीतर के उस शून्यता को कोई रूप देना चाहते हैं, तो सचमुच में ये बहुत मोटिवेटिंग आपका ये सेशन रहेगा उनके लिए, एंड फॉर ऑल ऑफ अस ऑल्सो. और बहुत ही अच्छा लगा मैम. थैंक यू वेरी मच. सेशन वाज सो नाइस. कुछ कहने के लिए नहीं.
धन्यवाद, धन्यवाद. Thank you.
Uruj, shall we go ahead?
Yes, sir. Now I would request Priyanka Mahato to please deliver the vote of thanks. Over to you, Priyanka.
Thank you, Ruth. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Karim City College and the Department of English, I would like to thank our honorable guest, Sucharita Dutta-Asane ma'am, for giving us an opportunity to hear her. It was a wonderful session, ma'am, very enlightening, and I'm sure everyone will agree with me that you left us with a thirst for knowledge. I would also like to thank our honorable principal, sir, for always supporting us and giving us his gracious presence. A big thanks to our head of the department, Dr. S.M. Yahya Ibrahim sir, and to all the faculty members for always organizing such events for us. It was indeed very helpful. Thank you to all the listeners for being a part of this event. And lastly, thank you again, ma'am. We'll be looking forward to more such deliberations by you in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Priyanka. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me this platform. You don't always get to talk about your writing and your philosophy of it. So this has been an incredible session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And one last request that if you can plan